Hello, I'm Sarah Hewins, and this is The Community Steps Up. With us today are John Mason, who is the chair of the board of directors of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association, as well as the owner of Tilson Brook Cranberry Company. Also with us today is Brian Wick, who's the executive director of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association. Thank you both for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us, Sarah.
Yeah. So John, I wanted to start with you. If you could tell us a little bit about your family history, how your parents and then you got into the cranberry industry.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to grow up on a small cranberry farm that my dad purchased in the late 70s. Having no former experience in agriculture or cranberries, as a state forester, he had great horticultural sense, and a co-worker talked him into buying a cranberry property on Sampson's Pond in South Carver, and that's where I was raised and brought up. And my dad always juggled it as a secondary income source, as he was the forester in Miles Standish for years. And 7 years ago, I proudly decided to continue the family heritage, purchased the property from my parents, and since have renovated some of the bog, and I'm raising my 6- and 7-year-old kids there now with my wife, and it's kind of what keeps me going. So
that's terrific.
Yeah.
You said earlier that your parents tried to discourage you from going into the cranberry business.
Yeah, I mean, I always, from ever I was a little kid, I wanted nothing more to be out on the bogs with my dad doing what he did, and you know, not understanding the economics of it at the time, and you know, being such a small operation, it wasn't anything that was going to support me full time. So I think that's where they were coming from, just to get me to go and do something different, make a career for myself, which I ultimately did in the cranberry industry. So I was fortunate enough to spend a dozen years working for Gary Garrettson at Slocum Gibbs Cranberry Company. And Gary is what really exposed me to the industry and made me the professional grower that I am today. Another thing Gary taught me was the importance of leadership within the industry. And it's more than just growing cranberries, but being a community leader and an industry leader. So in order to sustain the industry going forward. So that's what I've really focused my life on, is the cranberry industry, and I do what I can as a young grower to sustain it for my generation and hopefully future generations.
And Gary Garrettson is a terrific mentor, role model, I imagine.
Yeah, he really was, and it was really the foundation he gave me is what allowed me to go, and I'm currently a manager at the 80 Makepeace Company. I manage roughly 500 acres of bog, and I have 8 direct reports, and I'm directly in charge of those 500 acres, which is a big deal.
That's a big deal.
And
that's a lot of
so I grow cranberries professionally as an employer, and then I have my small farm at home that I do on the side. So it's busy.
So you mentioned that he taught you about leadership. What exactly does that leadership role involve? And I know you're the new chair of the Growers Association and the chair of its research committee, and also a member of the Cranberry Research Foundation, which is a lot of things. If you could go through each of those one at a time for us.
Yeah, I found myself wearing a handful of hats. I started out participating in the research committee of our Growers Association. And the Growers Association is critical to Massachusetts cranberries as they advocate for us on all different levels. But the horticultural side of things was really at the time what I was focused on, and the research committee fit my expertise. And as I got elected as a board member, I then started to chair the research committee, and ultimately have worked up to chairing the CCCGA board. I'm the youngest board member, and I'm really hopeful that myself stepping up and taking this leadership role helps motivate the other young farmers around town to do the same thing, because we need the young leadership.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's really good that you're doing that. Can you tell us what kind of research the Growers Association does, or this foundation? I don't know if they're different.
Yeah, so the role of the Growers Association is really to prioritize and set direction for the research initiatives that happen in the cranberry industry. So we work closely with UMass and the experiment station in Wareham. And they do a lot of great research, and they rely on the grower voice to direct their research in an effective manner and to give us results that we can use on our farm. With the climate change that we're experiencing and the restrictions coming in from different angles, controlling pests and dealing with the climate change it's changing the way we're growing cranberries. And a lot of the old rules that I grew up with, we've thrown out the window, and we're really kind of starting from scratch again. So the research is critical to all of this as we start to understand the impacts to our bogs.
Can either one of you give us an example of the things you've had to throw out the window and start over in terms of the research?
Yeah, I mean, as an industry, we've gotten away from the old school calendar spraying, broad spectrum insecticides, organophosphates. We're able to go in and specifically target pests and specific growth stages to interrupt them, resulting in a lot less impact to the environment. But with that comes unintended consequences. Some of those old insecticides were keeping pests at bay that are now starting to reemerge. So we've had a cranberry scale pest, which attaches itself to the bark and sucks all the life out of the plant. And it was a pest that Dr. Franklin spoke about back in the 50s that we hadn't seen until recently. And the research station at UMass was able to shift on the fly and direct their research to scale and help us from it decimating our crops over the last 5-6 years. As the climate changes, we have these new bugs that I didn't grow up with. Winter moth that came in through ornamentals, invasive species. We have this new black bug, the cranberry scale that I spoke of, and others. It's just these bugs are coming out of the woodwork as the climate changes, and to have a research center that can adapt on the fly here and be able to give us research and control methods in a quick manner is very important to us. So it's important that we keep in close communication with our researchers to be able to keep our issues front of mind.
I can imagine. I got scale on some of my house plants one year, and there was nothing I could do.
It's hard to get rid
I mean,
of.
it was almost impossible.
Yeah.
So if I can just talk a little bit
Sure.
about the Cranberry Station itself.
Yeah, please.
So it's affiliated with UMass Amherst, and it was established in 1910. And in Wareham, it's in the same location in East Wareham, and it was very much a remote outpost then, particularly with Amherst campus being couple hours plus away. There was a research out there, a researcher. He was a postdoctorate student, I believe, as I recall, named Dr. Henry Franklin that John mentioned earlier. And he was very eager, and they sent him out to help the cranberry industry. And he ended up loving it and really thriving in that remote region in establishing the Cranberry Station. The university gave him funds to build the administration building and a lab building, and it grew from there. So the building has been around since 1910, the core building. And since then, beyond Dr. Franklin, now there's a whole team of researchers that are there, entomologists, pathologists, nutritionists, physiologists, all the ologists are there. And they're really critical in combating the pests of our region and also helping the growers find that balance between growing a crop profitably and protecting the environment. So they're really the key to that, and they have been for over 100 years. The industry would not be where we are today without them. I mean, we can't understate that. Their research is critical to the past and also going forward. And so it's a good relationship that we have, but they are independent professors, researchers, they publish, et cetera. So, they have their research programs, and we're able, as John said, to help them understand what our needs are, because it's it's difficult. I've been in the industry for over 30 years, and every day I'm learning something new. So things are always changing on the bogs, and so having that relationship between the researchers and the growers is critically important, so that they're working on the problems that the growers are facing, at the same time making sure that their research is publishable and all that criteria they have from their professional standpoint. So it's a great relationship that we have.
Yes, and they have to do it in such a way that it's scientific and replicable.
Exactly, all those trials. I mean, and it takes years. Sometimes it can be frustrating as a grower, I'm sure. You want results, and I have this problem out there, and I want an answer to it. But it can take years to develop that, because they're working not only in the laboratory, but they also do their field trials. So in the laboratory, it's controlled for the most part. And then when you bring it out to the field and do your testing, your experiments out there, you got so many other variables now that it takes years to replicate that, to figure out, you have your controls and your different plots and the flags that people often see on cranberry bogs around here. When you see a large mass of flags in one section of a bog, it's probably a research trial that's going on of some sort. So they'll go out to different bogs and try their experiments out. So it takes quite a bit of time to try to combat these pests that we have, weeds, diseases, insects. We have our fair share of them. This crop's been grown as a native plant, as we know. We've talked about this before. It's native to the region, and as our plants have evolved over thousands of years, we'll so have the pests. And so they have a very solid footprint here, and with the climatic changes that we have, it's evolving and changing quite rapidly as well. So we don't lack for pests and challenges out there. And it all comes back as well to water quality and nutrients, and all those pieces are all part of the puzzle. It's not just combating the pests, it's how can you combat it in the most environmentally proper, sensible way. So it takes time to do that.
I remember a number of years ago a project that you and I, to some extent, but mainly you, were involved in, that involved nitrogen. Do you want to give us a little brief segue into that? Because it was a very interesting project.
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we have in the industry is the potential for nutrient discharge from a cranberry bog.
Nutrients such as?
Nutrients being phosphorus or nitrogen.
Okay.
So phosphorus is a problem for freshwater bodies. It's usually the missing ingredient, so to speak. In freshwater bodies, they have nitrogen naturally or from other sources. When you add phosphorus to that, it can create algae blooms and things like that. And so that's a water quality issue for freshwater ponds. And then nitrogen is the biggest problem for saltwater. So as water is moved to the coast, if you have excess nitrogen, it causes issues with the eelgrass and the flora and fauna that are living in that coastal region. So those are your two biggest challenges. And there was a study that was done, Buzzards Bay Coalition was the lead researcher on it. Woodwell Institute in Woods Hole
that's right.
was also the part of that, as well as the UMass Cranberry Station, and then the industry, plus the town of Carver. And so collectively we were working on ways to not only try to find ways to minimize the potential for that nutrient discharge, but also an education to the growers and the community at large about what they can do to help with that by holding their water, doing these best management practices that the researchers have developed over time. So it's quite dramatic. Many people look at cranberry bogs and think, oh, that's the problem with nutrient discharge. And as the studies have gone on over a period of last really 20 years or so, it's really painting a picture that, sure, commercial agriculture has an impact. You can't deny that.
Sure.
But what that impact is far less than what most people think, even what some of the researchers had thought, and really can be a positive benefit to it, because the bogs themselves can be a natural filter in taking the nutrients out. There was a study that was just released by pretty much the same group of people, in this case the Agricultural Research Service from USDA, who's also housed at the Cranberry Station. They were very much involved in this recent study, and it was just published, and it was showing that cranberries are contributing a very, I want to say small amount, a smaller amount than people believed of nitrogen discharge, about 20%. And that there were some of the bogs that they studied where the nitrogen coming into the bog system was higher than when it was leaving. So the bog was actually taking up some of that nitrogen.
Well, it makes sense because cranberry bogs are wetland bogs, and that's what wetlands do. They clean the water.
Right. So the study is showing that it is wastewater is the biggest challenge of nitrogen. It was a nitrogen study of nitrogen discharge to our coastal embayments, and that cranberry bogs can actually be a positive benefit to that, whether it's an active cranberry bog or even a bog that's being retired. It can now be used as a nitrogen sink. So the study was pointing out that there's many more benefits to cranberries having a healthy cranberry ecosystem than not.
Right.
And I know for many people they don't understand that. And as part of our job is to help get that message out there. You know, we're not saying that we're perfect, and there's always room for improvement. But the research is bearing out that it is not the story that many people have felt. It's different than the agriculture in the Midwest, where it's where the water is actively being discharged, and you know, with our management system, with our system of dikes and ditches, we can retain water. Tailwater recovery ponds are very important in retaining that excess nutrients. So there's a lot of things that our growers do as their best management practices, the way that they grow the cranberries, that are actually helping the environment and not hurting it. And that's I think is quite remarkable, and is a testament to what these people are. They are true stewards of the environment. They're not going out there and say, how can I destroy the environment today? They're going out there to say, what can I do to help sustain this farm and sustain the environment that these cranberries have been growing in for generations? So they're very much a partner in the environment, not an antagonist.
Well, of course, yes. So tell us about a tailwater recovery pond, because it's something that I know, having helped Dick Ward and his family with cranberries, but a lot of people don't understand that terminology.
So these, John could probably speak better, but I'd say over the last 20 or 30 years, they've really become a tool. They are, basically it's a dug water body. You dig a hole in the ground to fill it with water. And it is designed in two ways. One as a retainment system to collect your in-season water, so that it's like a closed loop system. So any water that's in your cranberry bog passes into this tailwater recovery, tailwater being your excess water, outsourcing water is recovered, allowing nutrients, pesticides, whatever that potential issues may be, to filter out and stay contained within the farm and not being exited. They're also used as another water source, which is becoming a challenge as we have droughts. Now we've had 3 droughts of record in the last 7 years. So clearly a more frequent occurrence. The last drought of record in our region prior to this 2016, I believe, was the first one we've had recently, was 1980, 81. So it used to be something that you had every 30 years or so. Now it's every couple years. So tailwater recovery ponds not only have the benefit of the nutrients and pesticides, water quality, but also water quantity, giving a grower a consistent source of water. So they're very important to the industry. They're supported by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. They actually encourage the practice of putting in a tailwater pond. They will provide engineering services, funding to help growers put these water bodies on their property, because they are a challenge. They're scaled depending on the size of your bog, and there's factors that go into it. But that aside, they're a large structure that you need to construct. So you need to have the room to do it. Where's the right spot on your farm to do it? How do you do it? There's a lot that goes into it. It's not just dig a hole in the ground and walk away. There's a lot of engineering and planning that go into one of these to have it done properly. So we've been seeing them in our region now for 20, 30 years. They are, as I said, highly encouraged, and I think now more than ever, they're an important facet to have. Not everyone can have one because some people don't have the space or the availability to put these in. And some bogs are in more sensitive areas than others. You might already have a closed loop system with your bog, or there's a lot, not every bog is the same. Right. But in the right spot for the right opportunity, they make a lot of sense. So it's something that's really been helping our growers improve their farm.
So not to beat this up too much, but how exactly do they keep the fertilizers, whatever it is, from exiting, or help them to, the water goes out and there's less nitrogen or less phosphorus?
Right, so every system is going to be different,
right.
But in some of them, your tailwater recovery pond never leaves the farm. There may not be an outlet for it, so it's truly going to stay on your farm. The other aspect to it is time, sunlight, and water are the three things that generally break down our problems. And so by containing them in a tailwater system, you're allowing those three elements to play out, allowing pesticides to break down, allowing your nutrients to break down. So there's that aspect of it as well. Time is a big factor in keeping these pieces in your bog system. So growers as well can retain water within their dikes and ditches during the growing season, which they do anyway, particularly if they don't have a tailwater recovery pond. And that as well breaks down those factors. But the tailwater one is just a big collection spot where you can just retain all that right in one spot.
So when the study found that it was generally from wastewater that was causing most of the problems, that would be from residential dwellings?
Yeah, I mean, sewering is widely known now and accepted by the research community as the best thing that can be done in our coastal communities. We all know that's very expensive and not easily done. So that is the biggest challenge. If we could sewer our coastlines, we'd be in great shape. And there's a lot of progress being made there, as we know, but it's tough, and not every community can absorb that. So that's one of the challenges. So what can Cranberries do? Well, we can help by minimizing our impact on that, and that's the role that we're playing. We're not going to solve the problem, but we can help, and so that's by the construction of our bogs, by following best management practices, careful with our fertilizer use and how they're applied, when they're applied. All those pieces go into a best management practice. That's the research that the Cranberry Station has done for years now to help growers with that. We've using less nutrients, holding the water at the right time so that you don't get the potential for off-site. It's called trash flows, where you're taking out some of your extra plant material and things like that, removing it from your bog, cleaning up your bog. There's lots of small things that can be done that can help our bogs with nutrient discharge.
Yeah, I'll just add, in the grand scheme of agriculture, we're fortunate that, our crops don't require as much nutrients as a lot of others do. And to Brian's point, we have diked off bogs with control structures we call flumes. And it gives us the ability of really controlling our output and inputs. And it also allows us to flood the bogs during certain times of the year. And anytime a grower can use a cultural practice to control a pest, we would much rather that than alternatives. So we can do short floods during certain times of the year to control bugs. We can hold our water late in the spring, and it cuts down on fungal pathogens, improving fruit quality if you have a bog that's had issues in the past. So we use that to our advantage. Not many crops have that ability to put them underwater.
That's true.
Throughout the season. So.
Plus, I understand that all the fertilizers they're very expensive. So if you can find a way not to use too many,
no grower wants to put out a crop input if they don't have to.
Right.
It's very exexpensive.
I mean, the cranberry industry really wrote the book on integrated pest management because they didn't have the money to apply. So when they did apply, they wanted it warranted. So that's what the UMass Cranberry Station helps us set thresholds for certain pests, economic thresholds. And throughout the growing season, we go out, we sweep our bogs with a bug net, 25 sweeps per acre per week. So we always have an understanding of what the pest complex is out there. You're always going to have pests. The industry's been here for over 100 years, and those pests have been here for over 100 years. So, you know, we all tolerate a certain level of them, but once it becomes economically damaging, that's when we have to make our treatment decisions. Right. So everything is closely monitored, and yeah.
And unlike John was saying, unlike other crops, we can do things like an application of sand to the bogs occasionally, flooding. We have some tools that other commodities don't have.
Yeah. Right.
And so we can, that's what integrated pest management is. It's not just applying a chemical to treat a pest. It's an integrated approach. We're looking at biological controls, cultural controls, and we have that ability, fortunately, based on the nature of our crop. Right. And we were one of the first commodities in the country to develop an integrated pest management program due to the vision of the UMass Cranberry Station.
I did not know that. No. So tell us some more, if you can, John, about the horticultural research that you are interested in and why it's important.
I mean, really my function is just to make that link between the growers and the researchers. So every growing season is different. Every growing season presents different challenges. So at the end of harvest, I call it the post-mortem meeting. We all get together as growers and discuss the season. And that really highlights what issues growers had. And based on what research has been done and the direction we thought it would be going, it helps us align and make sure that, you know, we're conducting the proper research to get results for the growers with the issues that are front of mind. So,
and the researchers are part of that meeting.
Oh,
they're right there,
right. Oh,
listening, adding in. So it's a very dynamic.
Oh, so you sit down with those researchers?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
A bunch of growers, That's really
I'm
good.
not a researcher, so I know what the problems are, but I rely on the researchers to find the avenues for the research. So yeah, it's a very collaborative effort amongst the researchers and the Cranberry folks. So that's really our main function. And it's been very successful. So, but in the grand scheme of agriculture, again, we're a blip on the radar compared to other commodities. I mean, the entire cranberry industry is the size of a North Dakota wheat farm. So we don't necessarily have the horsepower behind us of some of these other industries, corn and soybean. You know, where you plant A, apply B, and you're going to end up with C. And there's college programs to back it. And you know, cranberries. You know, and we're still kind of hunter-gatherers. I hate to say it, but it's just it's exciting. There's so much opportunity for research, and you know, every year we're just learning more and more about how our bogs and our plants interact with Mother Nature. So the challenge is really now is the curveballs that Mother Nature has been throwing us. So the key to sustaining these farms here in Massachusetts is to renovate. You know, some of these old bogs they're less efficient, they're not level. So we go in and we strip out the old plant material, we add new sand, new irrigation systems. We're putting monitoring computers out there and sensors so that we're only putting water on when it's needed. Frost protection at night is necessary. We run the sprinklers to keep the buds from freezing in the spring and to keep the fruit from freezing in the fall. In the old days, it got cold, you just turned on all your pumps and you wasted water and fuel all night. Now we have automated systems with remote sensors, and we can really fine-tune our water inputs, and it reduces fuel, water, everything. It's just, it's the technology that's come along with some of this stuff has really been beneficial to us, the environment, and everything we do, our operations and the economics. So
I imagine.
it's the new varieties we plant, they're crossbred. The most successful varieties here in Massachusetts have been propagated down in New Jersey. The Mullica Queen and now the Haynes variety seem to be the most favorable. And with my experience.
Successful, how do you mean that?
I mean successful, like they'll grow 3 to 4 times more crop than the old native varieties.
Okay.
So it's that's really what this industry needs is to retool. It's no different than, you know, a manufacturing facility or any company reinvesting. And it's, you know, I view my farm and the farms I manage as manufacturing facilities. They don't have brick and mortar walls. We're working within Mother Nature, and you know, it's important that we protect the environment we work in, and you know, try to get as many cranberries out of it as we can in the meantime, because that's what's ultimately going to sustain all the open space that we enjoy here in the town of Carver and our surrounding areas.
That's right.
So it's yeah.
That's for sure.
I mean, the costs continue to go up, and the price for the fruit generally not as much. So it becomes, you know, it's an economic question. If you're not yielding enough fruit, because your growing costs are about the same, whether you're growing an older variety or a new one, it's basically the same.
Yeah.
And so if you're getting a small amount of crop on that versus a large amount, you're going to be better with that larger amount. And because with the costs continue to rise, as we all know as consumers, everything's going up.
Right.
And so it's no different than a cranberry farmer. So the secret to success long term is to have higher yields to offset those costs. They're also driving down the costs. Those efficiencies that John were talking about, the irrigation, the temperature probes, all those kind of things are all helping the growers drive down their costs. You try to go as low as you can. They're using less labor than you have in the past. I mean, there's a lot of efficiencies have been gained, which is helping. But you can only go so low.
Right.
And so,
Right.
so you have to find that balance of finding gaining your costs, getting them under control as best you can, and still growing a good crop, and then growing enough berries to put that all together. So
But I like that whole idea that it uses less water, less fuel, which is better for everybody,
Yeah.
Exactly.
including the
You're-
environment.
You know, you're growing 3 to 4 times more crop on the same footprint with the same inputs, and a lot of times fewer inputs.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Yeah.
a renovated bog is using less water, oftentimes less inputs, because you get rid of a lot of your pests that were out there on your old material. You're kind of starting fresh. So there's a lot of advantages to a renovated bog. Actually, a renovated bog helps reduce nitrogen loading as well. That's part of the research that has come out of the Cranberry Station.
How does that work?
It has to do with having your soil. This is a whole other topic.
Sorry.
We could have one of the
We could
researchers
go
come
on
in,
forever, I know.
but you're basically starting with a clean slate with that fresh layer of sand,
Okay.
and it's absorbing more of those nutrients because a lot of your trash meaning sticks and leaves and things like that, your organic pieces, has been removed. So you're kind of starting out fresh, and so now that sand is able to retain some of your nutrients and go into that peat layer that's right below it, which traps it. So it's I'm giving a very poor example because I'm not a researcher, but I do know in discussions with them that they have shown through their studies that a renovated cranberry bog will actually help retain more nitrogen than an older bog can.
older
So
bog.
Yep. And you know, when we renovate these bogs as a cranberry grower, it's a major investment.
Sure.
It's an investment that if you proposed in just about any other business, you'd probably be fired. You're talking a 10-year ROI, and you know, these are generational resets. They're you know, and they result in short-term disruption of the land. You know, we have to access sand resources and different resources in order to get the renovation project completed. But once it's completed, banks are loamed and seeded, and now we have a functional cranberry farm that's going to be open space, hopefully, for the next 100 years.
And it takes 10 years. I had no idea.
It can,
Yeah.
because you're losing what crop you were getting on the old bogs. You have the cost of installing and planting the new bogs.
Buying the
And then
vines.
buying the vines, which have become very expensive. And then it's 2 to 3 years to get the bog established before it starts getting decent crops off of it. We're getting better. We're getting more efficient at that process through different planting methods and planting earlier in the season. You can get your return quicker, but it's a major reset for a cranberry grower to renovate a bog that takes a long time to seek the revenue back on.
The ROI used to be about 14 years, so it has gone down.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we're getting better and growing bigger crops. So,
And the generational change that you mentioned, I think, is important to understand. Because many of us living in this community are used to the cranberry bogs being there, looking the way they are, because many of our bogs are the same bog, the same footprint for 75, 100 years. And now they're starting to go through a significant change in being renovated, retooled, replanted, etc., which needs to happen to stay as a sustainable industry. But I think for a lot of us, we're not used to seeing that at the scale that we're seeing it right now. This is truly a generational change. This is setting up the industry for the next 50 plus years. You know, without doing this, many of the bogs won't survive. That's the harsh reality.
What does that look like when a bog is being renovated? For those who may not know.
well, a lot of the bogs here in Massachusetts were planted in naturally wet areas before modern day irrigation. The only place they could survive was in wet areas. We're finding out now we're better to be up and higher and drier with our bogs so that we can control the inputs. We have modern day irrigation. We have the ability to flood with pumps. So the first decision we make is the bog rebuildable? You know, some of these old bogs with 20 feet of peat, you wouldn't dare put a bulldozer on them.
Right.
You know, so it's important that we have the ability to take those bogs and transfer them into upland properties, which we do. If we do have an older bog that we deem is able to be renovated, generally we'll start with the outside perimeter and try to get a shape that's more efficient to us. Our larger new designed harvest equipment likes flat, big, wide bogs. It doesn't like tight corners, triangles. So we try to replicate rectangular shaped beds whenever possible, and to make the overall shape of the bog more desirable and efficient. Then we go in and we mechanically excavate and strip out the old plant material, and we bulldoze the underlayment level, and then we put fresh sand on, generally 6 to 8 inches thick. That's a lot
of sand.
Yeah, it is a lot of sand, but it's a one-shot deal. It's generally the bogs that we're stripping are over 100 years old, and the way we're building them today, we hope that they're going to sustain for 100 years. So 6 to 8 inches of sand is a good base for these new hybrids to grow in. Their root system is deeper. We'll install drainage tile so that we can eliminate the interior drainage ditches, because bogs like it wet but not too wet. So it's important to be able to get the water off of bogs during certain times of the season. So we can where the old bogs had independent sections divided by interior ditches, you had to go and harvest those independent sections as you went along. Right. So now when we renovate, we fill in those ditches, we replace them with underground drainage tiles, and we're able to go out and treat the bog as all one section, and we can harvest a lot quicker.
Because I know some of the old bogs were built along streams that meandered.
Yep.
Yes.
Corners and triangles, as you said.
Yeah, so flow-through bogs, they're our death knell. We've eliminated the majority of them by having bypass canals around the outside and not having the water flow through the bogs. That's how we combat that. So we wouldn't renovate a bog that had water flowing through it. We would first correct the water before renovating the bog. So we decide the bog's renovatable. We decide on a shape. We go in, we strip out the old material, we bulldoze new sand on top, we pull in drainage tile, we run new irrigation. We're using these new pop-up sprinkler heads. They're similar to what you'd see in your lawn irrigation. They're much taller. They're 18 inches tall, and they come up and go down, and it reduces us from having to have crews out there prior to harvest, taking them off and putting them in the spring. They're more automatic and more efficient, more watertight. You get better uniformity.
Also encourage by the USDA.
Oh yeah, USDA wants us to have more modern sprinkler systems because the efficiencies that come along with them. And then it's time to plant. So we decide the variety that we decide on. Generally depends on the timing that it ripens. So all these varieties ripen at different times, and logistically we can't harvest all our bogs at once. So we need some earlier varieties, and we need some middle and late varieties so that we can stay busy throughout the harvest season. And then generally water flow dictates that. As water moves through the property, we do our best to recycle it. So if we can start with the early varieties and then be able to recycle that water down through as they ripen, it really adds efficiency and results in less environmental impact as well, using less water. So there's a decision tree we go through the renovation process. Once the vines are decided upon and procured, we'll start planting starting the end of April. The earlier you can get the vines in the ground, the quicker they'll establish, and the quicker you're going to get a decent crop off of them. So we really try to work throughout the winter to have these beds ready to plant in the spring. There's two methods to planting. You either get your vines in a rooted plug, or you get cuttings from an existing bed or from a bed that's been used just for propagating vines, and they'll mow them off oftentimes into hay bales. And then we cut the hay bales open, we spread the vines out on top of the fresh sand, and then we have a machine that just discs them in with a roller behind it that closes up the farrows, and we apply water, and into May as the sand warms up it starts to offshoot roots. And the other method with the plugs is we have a roller that goes out and puts a bunch of dimples in the bog, and then we hand plant each plug at a 1 foot square. It's a little more tedious, but you're starting with a root in the ground, so you can gain a little bit. Bless you. So those are the two methods of planting, and then it's tender loving care. It's like having a newborn. When you have a new bog, you're tending to it, you're making sure it doesn't dry out, requires a little more frequent irrigation. Again, the remote sensing has taught us a lot about bringing in new bog, and then we start applying some fertilizer, and hopefully it all comes in, and 3 years later we get a crop off of it. So
3 years,
yeah,
takes a while.
Yeah, it does. It does. A lot of times through the process you'll get a partial crop, which you still have to go through the process of harvesting and getting off the bog. You can't be leaving berries out there. It just brings rise to more fungal pathogens and fruit rot. So
And brings deer
and brings deer, yeah.
and geese.
Yeah.
So what people might see particularly early on in excavation, is you're going to see massive piles
Right.
of earth.
Right.
Because you're scraping that up and you're bringing it into piles, and that's oftentimes usually composted somewhere on the farm, because that top layer of material can be broken down, composted, and then used as an underlayment in future projects on the property. Sometimes growers will mow off some of the vines and bale them. I don't know if that's been done as frequently as it has in the past. And then, I don't know, there's something to give them to farmers and things like that, I believe, for the bales. I know towns have actually used them as hay bales in wetland
Construction
projects. They've
project, yeah.
used cranberry balings. So everything is used, reused to some extent, well, to fully. And so, but when you're seeing that, driving by, walking by a bog that's being renovated, it's going to look like a mess. I mean, it's big piles of earth being moved around, and then when the fresh sand comes in, they'll dump the sand out there and then spread it out. At that point, before the vines get planted, it looks like a bed of sand, perfectly level sand. So it's definitely a phase that's going through any type of renovation project. You're redoing your house, it's a mess before it looks nice again.
Right.
Same thing with the bog. Of course, they can't get any sand or any of that earth material leaving the property. That's one of the aspects of the State Wetlands Protection Act, and our growers know that, so they have to make sure that stays on their property, and that's part of their challenge when they're doing those excavation properties to make sure that they're doing everything properly.
Right.
So that's a very important part.
That's where Brian and the Growers Association really steps in, just to keep the industry aligned and working in proper order. So
I remember when I was conservation agent for the town, getting phone calls. They're ruining the bog out, behind my house. They're renovating the bog behind your house. It's going to look that way for a little while.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it is shocking. There's no doubt about it. If you don't know what you're looking at,
Right.
it looks pretty drastic.
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
But it has its purpose.
So, John, earlier you said you were the youngest president of the Board of Directors of the Growers Association. Tell us a little bit about that, the younger growers, the next generation. What's the future look like
Well,
to you?
I think I'm confident that there is a future, first and foremost. So I'm only second generation. I have colleagues that are fourth, fifth generation, and looking to do this for a living. So I'm confident that we have the youth. They're not necessarily stepping up to be leaders yet, but that's really what I'm hoping to motivate them to do, because it's critical that we have industry support to keep this ship going. So yeah, really just it's a matter of just participating and advocating and educating, as I'm doing here, hopefully, because as our land values increase and as population encroaches on our farms, it's important that we coexist. And I think a lot of folks moving to town, and even those that have lived here for a long time, don't quite understand our industry. And I'm taken back at times by how little even my neighbors know. So I go out of my way anytime I can to educate. I invite my neighbors during harvest to come and see the process, be part of the process. Gary Gerritsen taught me that. He did the same thing with his neighbors, and really once you bring them in and they realize what you're doing, they become an advocate for you, and they enjoy the open space. That's generally a big part of why they moved to this town. But that open space doesn't stay open space without a healthy cranberry industry, and that's the reality of it. So we have alternatives. We have great land resources that we have alternatives. And we really want to keep it cranberries. So
That's right.
That's what I'm focused on.
And I think that a lot of other people do too. I know we recently did a survey for the Open Space and Recreation Plan, and every time we update it, we have to do a new survey. And it's been consistent since the year 2000. The most recent survey was done in 2022. And 75%, we asked the question, how important is the rural character in Carver to you? 75% said extremely. And to keep that the way that they like it, we have to have a healthy cranberry industry, because there's so much upland, necessary and related upland, it's called, that could go to housing.
Right.
And
Yeah, the alternative isn't a good one for the town or its citizens. So yeah, it warmed my heart at town meeting last year when all the support came out on behalf of the cranberry industry. That was nice to see.
it was
So
very, very nice
that was
to see.
re-encouraging. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And John's that example of that next generation that's stepping up. The average age of a farmer in this country is around 60 years old, and that number has been inching up, not down. And he's part of that, trying to buck that trend, because we need that. And so we are seeing that. We're seeing younger people not necessarily even being owners, but working in the cranberry industry. That's part of it too. We have an aging working population as well.
Right.
So that's part of our challenge at the association, is getting more awareness out to our young people, high school, VOTEC, ag schools, regular, conventional high school, it doesn't matter. We need to do a better job of awareness that you can have a career in cranberries. You don't have to necessarily own the bog, but you can have a very successful and rewarding career if you're the right type of person. Obviously, you got to like the outdoors and working in elements, etc. It's not for everybody, but we're finding out that a lot of young people just don't know what's right literally in their backyard as an opportunity. You've seen it with many people coming to work with you that don't have an ag background and came from other walks of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the opportunities are out there. You know, you can get good pay, you can get good benefits. I mean,
It's
can
a
do
real
well.
job.
Yeah.
You know, agriculture as a whole is no longer a strong back and weak mind. You know, with the
Right.
technology we're using and our modern day processes, it's quite the opposite. So we need young, smart people, and we're finding them. They're coming in, and they're generally taken back, and they'd wish they'd found this industry sooner and started their career sooner. So we need to do a better job at exposing the industry and teaching these kids the opportunity they have right in their backyard. Because, you know, like myself, I was a frustrated high school student. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, and Cranberries, just the whole aspect of the operation, I adore, and I know there's others that would too. So it's a matter of just
sure. Yeah.
finding them and bringing them in.
Kudos to you
So-
for what you're trying to do. It's really important.
It is. So,
Well, any last comments before we wrap this up? Either one of you? No?
I think we covered a fair amount of ground.
I think so too. Well, I want to thank you
for
both
having
for coming. Brian Wick, John Mason.
yeah.
Let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, I appreciate you, Sarah, for doing this and
Thank you.
Educating our public on our cranberry industry. So,
That's the goal.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us.